Your Honor, before we proceed to the final settlement, I need to present something to this court. The room went still. My wife of 38 years, Diane, was seated at the opposite table with her attorney, a polished woman named Carolyn Marsh, who charged $400 an hour and had the composure of someone who had never lost a case. Diane herself was wearing the navy blue dress she always wore when she wanted to appear reasonable. She had worn it to our daughter's graduation. She had worn it to my mother's funeral. She knew exactly what she was doing. Her attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, this is a settlement hearing. Mr. Calloway has had 14 months to submit documentation. Whatever he's holding cannot possibly be relevant at this stage. Judge Patricia Hensley looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Mr. Calloway, she said, I hope this is not a delay tactic. It isn't, Your Honor. These documents were finalized by a forensic accountant 72 hours ago. I believe the court needs to see them before any settlement is approved. Diane's expression did something I hadn't seen in a long time. The confidence in it cracked, just slightly, just for a moment, like ice shifting under pressure. She recovered fast. She always recovered fast. But I had seen it, and I knew I had her. Let me go back to the beginning. Not the very beginning, because the real beginning was probably 20 years ago when things quietly started to go wrong in ways I was too busy to notice. But the beginning of this particular story starts about 16 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when I came home from a post-retirement fishing trip to find a manila envelope on the kitchen counter and Diane sitting at the dining room table with her hands folded, waiting. She told me she wanted a divorce. I am 63 years old. I spent 35 years building a commercial construction company from a two-man operation out of my garage into a firm with 40 employees and contracts across 4 states. I sold it in 2019 for more money than I ever expected to see in my lifetime. I thought that was the beginning of something, the chapter where Diane and I finally had time for each other, for travel, for all the things we had promised ourselves when the work was done. I was wrong. She told me she was unhappy, had been unhappy for years. I won't pretend I was a perfect husband. I worked too much. I missed things. I know that. But I had spent the previous 2 years trying to make up for lost time, and I thought we were getting somewhere. Apparently, she had a different version of those 2 years in her head. The divorce paperwork was already prepared. That was the thing that knocked the air out of me more than anything else, she said. Not that she was unhappy. Not even that she wanted to leave, but that she had a lawyer, a strategy, and a settlement proposal ready to go, all while we were cooking dinner together and watching television and going to our grandson Tyler's baseball games. All while I believed we were rebuilding something. The proposal was everything. The house we had bought in 1,991 inches Scottsdale, which was now worth a little under $1 million. 60% of the joint investment accounts. The full amount of my pension from the company sale, structured over 10 years. Her attorney had argued that Diane had sacrificed a career to raise our 2 children, which was true, and that she was entitled to a share of everything the business had produced, which was partially true. But 60% of everything, plus the full pension, came out to somewhere around $2 million, leaving me with the remainder of my retirement savings and the equity in a boat I hadn't finished paying off. My attorney, a calm and methodical man named Gerald Oates, who had handled my business contracts for 15 years, told me to fight it. This is aggressive, he said. We can negotiate this down substantially. I told him not to fight it. Not yet. He thought I had given up. My daughter, Renata, who knew what Diane was asking for, thought I had lost my mind. She called me 3 times in the first week, and each time I told her the same thing. I need a little time, sweetheart. Trust me. My son Kevin didn't call at all. Kevin had decided early on that his mother was the wronged party in this situation. He had been cold to me for months, showing up to family dinners with Diane at his side and barely speaking to me. I understood it, even if it hurt. Kevin had always been closer to his mother. He saw her the way children often see the parent who stayed home, as the sacrificial one, the one who gave everything. He wasn't wrong about that. He just didn't have the full picture. Nobody had the full picture, including me. until Marcus found it. Marcus is not my son. He is not my nephew or my employee. He is a 41-year-old forensic accountant I hired 3 months after Diane served me with the settlement proposal because something was bothering me and I couldn't figure out what it was. Here is what was bothering me. When I sold the company in 2019, the total assets were significant. The accounts, the real estate holdings, the equipment, after taxes and legal fees and the buyout structure, what remained was a specific number that I knew very well because I had spent 35 years building it. But when I sat down with the settlement documents Diane's attorney had prepared, the number they were dividing felt smaller than it should have been. Not by a little, by a lot. I had been the one running the business. Diane had managed our household accounts, our personal investments, our taxes. For 38 years, I trusted her completely with that part of our financial life because she was detail-oriented and careful and, frankly, better at it than I was. I had no reason to question her, until I did the math myself and the numbers didn't add up. I gave Marcus everything, every account statement, every tax return, every financial document going back 15 years. I told him to find what I was missing. He told me it would take time. I told him I had 14 months before the settlement hearing. He found it in 8. The first thing Marcus found was a trust. It was established 11 years ago in the name of a holding company registered in Delaware, the kind of anonymous structure that is completely legal but requires intention to set up. Someone had to decide to do it. Someone had to hire an attorney, fund the account, and keep it off the books of our joint finances for 11 years. The trust had been funded gradually, never in amounts large enough to trigger automatic reporting, over a period of a decade. The total value at the time Marcus found it was a little over $600,000. I sat in Marcus's office looking at that number for a long time. $600,000, moved quietly and carefully out of our joint finances over 11 years. While I was building the company, while I thought we were building something together. Who helped her? I asked. Marcus hesitated in exactly the way Clyde Barrow had hesitated in the story about the DNA tests, and I knew before he answered that what came next was going to be the part I least wanted to hear. The trust has a co-trustee, he said. Someone with signatory authority who helped establish the legal structure. Who? His name is Gary Wheaton. Gary Wheaton is my brother-in-law, Diane's younger brother. He is a certified financial planner who has been in private practice for 20 years. He was the best man at our wedding. He is the godfather of my son, Kevin. He has eaten at my table hundreds of times, borrowed my tools, asked my advice, celebrated my success. When I sold the company, it was Gary who took me out for dinner and told me I had earned everything I had, while he was helping my wife hide $600,000 of it. You're certain? I asked Marcus. He slid the documents across the table without a word. Gary's signature was on the trust establishment paperwork. Gary had been the one who structured the fund contributions to stay under reporting thresholds. Gary had been the one who managed the trust investments for 11 years and collected a small management fee for doing so, which I also found deeply clarifying about his motivations. I drove home and sat in my driveway for an hour. 38 years. A brother-in-law I had loved like a younger sibling. A wife I had trusted with everything. And while I was pouring every year of my life into a company to build a future for our family, the two of them had been quietly building an escape route. I had 3 choices, according to Gerald. I could present the findings immediately and accelerate the legal proceedings. I could use the information in settlement negotiations to get better terms quietly. Or I could wait until the final hearing and present it publicly, which Gerald told me was dramatic and legally riskier, but which would make it very difficult for Diane or Gary to pretend the trust had been a simple oversight. I chose to wait. Some things should not be resolved quietly. Marcus was a 1-2 year old in the original story. The character who delivers the twist revealed to the narrator is a private investigator. In my version, it is a forensic accountant. The escalating betrayals in the original are Victor, then Raymond, then Dennis. In my story, the escalation is the trust, then the co-trustee, Then the reason for the co-trustee, which Marcus uncovered in the final weeks before the hearing. He found emails. Not in a way that compromised anyone's privacy legally. The emails had been part of a financial record disclosure that Diane's attorneys provided during discovery, buried in a folder of routine correspondence they apparently believed was too dense for anyone to examine carefully. Marcus was not most people. The emails between Diane and Gary went back 14 years. They were businesslike in tone, which made them worse in some ways. Not passionate or desperate, but practical, methodical. Two people calmly planning. There was one email from 2013 that I have read so many times I could recite it. Gary wrote, D, the structure is solid. If anything changes on his end, you have a clean exit. Everything is where it needs to be. Diane wrote back 3 words. Thank you, G. If anything changes on his end, I had been a contingency, a risk to be managed. For at least 14 years, while I thought I was building a life with my wife, she had been treating our marriage as a position she might need to exit. And her brother, my brother-in-law, my friend, had been her financial advisor in that exit strategy. Standing in Judge Hensley's courtroom with Marcus's report in my hand, I thought about all of that. I thought about the navy blue dress, and the folded hands, and the prepared paperwork waiting for me on the kitchen counter. I thought about how smoothly it had all been arranged, how little she had expected me to push back, how completely she had underestimated the man she had spent 38 years sleeping next to. Your Honor, I said, what I have here is a forensic accounting report documenting a financial trust established 11 years ago using funds diverted from joint marital assets. The trust was structured to conceal its existence from me and from standard financial disclosures. Its current value is approximately $640,000, which was not included in the settlement proposal my wife's attorneys presented to this court. The silence in the courtroom was the particular silence of a room in which everyone is doing math. Carolyn Marsh said something. I don't remember exactly what it was. Something about documentation, about procedural requirements. Her voice had changed timbre slightly. She was still composed, but the composure had become effortful. Diane said nothing. Judge Hensley reviewed the first pages of the report. She took her time. She read carefully. When she looked up, she looked at Diane with an expression I recognized from Gerald's face when I had first shown him the documents. It was the expression of someone deciding how much restraint to exercise. Mrs. Calloway, Judge Hensley said. Are you aware of the trust described in these documents? Diane's attorney put a hand on her arm. She started to speak anyway. I'd like to confer with my client, Carolyn Marsh said quickly. You'll have that opportunity, Judge Hensley said. First, I'd like an answer to my question. Mrs. Calloway, are you aware of the trust? The room waited. Diane looked at me. I don't know what she was looking for. Anger, maybe, or some remnant of the man who had always let things go, always decided the fight wasn't worth it, always kept the peace to keep the family intact. I looked back at her steadily and gave her nothing. Yes, she said finally. I'm aware of it. Did you establish this trust without disclosing it to your husband? Her attorney said, Your Honor, I strongly advise my client not to answer questions without... Did you establish this trust without your husband's knowledge? Judge Hensley's voice did not change volume or temperature. It simply became final. Another silence. Shorter this time. Yes. The hearing was suspended. There would be a full review of financial disclosures, an inquiry into potential violations of marital asset laws, and a referral to the state bar regarding disclosure obligations. Carolyn Marsh, who was a competent attorney and not personally dishonest, looked genuinely uncomfortable. She had not known about the trust. That much was clear. What was also clear, as Gerald explained to me afterward in the courthouse parking lot, was that the original settlement proposal was now entirely void. We would be starting over, with full financial disclosure this time, on both sides. I sat in my truck after Gerald left. I had parked under a mesquite tree at the far end of the lot, and I could hear a bird somewhere in the branches that I couldn't see. I thought about calling Renata. I thought about calling no one. I had not eaten since early morning, and it was now past 2 in the afternoon, and I was 63 years old, and everything I had believed about my life for 38 years was a story that someone else had written. I drove to my grandson Tyler's baseball practice instead. He was 12. He played second base. He had my wife's dark eyes and my son's stubborn way of standing, and watching him field a ground ball in the late afternoon Arizona sun felt like the first real thing I had experienced in months. I sat in the bleachers and nobody knew me there. Just a grandfather watching his grandson practice. Tyler saw me when practice ended. He jogged over with his glove under his arm and sat beside me and said, "Hey, Grandpa, did you see my double play?" I told him it was the best double play I'd ever seen, which was not an exaggeration because he had in fact turned it cleanly. We sat there for a while and he told me about school and a girl he sort of liked and whether he thought the Diamondbacks would improve their bullpen this season. He was 12 and full of opinions and entirely uninterested in the adult catastrophe unfolding around him, and I was grateful for every single second of it. My son Kevin found out what had happened before I told him. Renata called him, I think, or maybe Diane did. He called me that evening and I let it go to voicemail and listened to the message an hour later. It was a long message. He started angry, the way Kevin always started things, at full volume before he had his facts straight. He said some things I won't repeat because they were said in heat and I don't believe he meant them at his core. Then his voice shifted partway through, the way it does when he's processing something difficult in real time, and by the end of the message he was quieter. He said, "I need to understand what happened, Dad. Call me when you can." I called him the next morning. I told him everything. Not just the trust. All of it. The email. Gary. The phrase, "if anything changes on his end." I had not planned to tell Kevin about Gary. Some part of me wanted to protect the relationship between them, Kevin and his godfather, the uncle who had taught him to fish and taken him to his first son's game. But Kevin was 36 years old and he deserved the truth. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Uncle Gary knew about this for 14 years, he said. "Yes." "He helped set it up?" "Yes." Kevin made a sound that I recognized from when he was a boy and hurt himself on the playground, not crying but just absorbing the impact of something that had hit him harder than expected. "Dad," he said. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. He said, "I took her side. I was cold to you for months and I had no idea." I told him it was all right. He said, "It's not all right. I'm your son." We talked for 2 hours. It was the longest conversation Kevin and I had had in years, possibly ever. He asked me about the early days of the business, things I had never told him about the years when money was scarce and the company almost didn't survive. He asked me things about his mother that were difficult to answer honestly and that I tried to answer honestly anyway because he was 36 and because Diane was still his mother and because the truth is the only thing that doesn't require maintenance. Before we hung up, he said, "What are you going to do about Gary?" I told him I didn't know yet. He said, "I can't call him. Not right now." I told him I understood. I understood completely. The formal hearing took place 4 months later. Diane had new attorneys by that point. Carolyn Marsh had withdrawn from the case, which I thought showed some integrity on her part. The new attorneys were competent, but they were working with a much weaker position. The trust had to be disclosed. The financial records had to be accurate. The settlement was renegotiated from scratch. I kept the house. We had bought it together, and I had built a workshop in the backyard and planted fruit trees along the south wall and watched my grandchildren learn to swim in the pool, and I was not prepared to let someone else's calculated exit strategy take that from me. The investment accounts were split equitably, not 60-40. My pension remained mine. Diane received a fair settlement for her years of contribution to our household and our family, because those contributions were real and I was not interested in punishing her by pretending they weren't. Gary was referred to a state financial regulatory authority. There were questions about his management of the trust, about the fees he had collected, about his disclosure obligations as a licensed financial planner. I don't know exactly how that resolved. I stopped following it when it became clear that the regulatory process would handle it without my involvement. I have not spoken to Gary since the day Marcus showed me his signature on the trust documents. I don't plan to. There are people you can forgive and keep at a distance. There are betrayals that are deep enough that forgiveness, if it comes at all, looks like letting go rather than reconciliation. What Gary did was not a moment of weakness. It was 14 years of deliberate calculation. I don't have space in whatever time I have left for someone who spent 14 years treating my trust like a resource to be managed. Renata came to Scottsdale 2 weeks after the final hearing. She lives in Denver with her husband and my 2 younger grandchildren, and she doesn't visit as often as I'd like, which is something we are working on. She showed up at my door with a casserole and the particular expression she has inherited from her grandmother, my mother, which is the expression of a woman who has decided to fix something. She stayed for 4 days. We cooked together and sat on the back porch in the evenings, and she let me talk without interrupting, which is a skill she has always had and which I have always been grateful for. On the 3rd evening, she said, "I want you to know something, Dad." I told her to go ahead. She said, "When I was 15, I overheard a fight between you and Mom. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember thinking, my dad is not going to leave, no matter what. He's going to stay and figure it out. I always thought that about you. I didn't know what to say to that." She said, "That's not a criticism. I just want you to know that I always knew who you were, even when I didn't understand everything that was happening." I told her that meant more to me than she knew. She said it was meant to. The weeks after Renata left were the hardest. The house was quiet in a way that houses get when they've held a full life and then emptied out. I had sold a business. I had ended a 38-year marriage. I had lost a brother-in-law I had loved. I was 63, and the future was a blank page, and I was not someone who had ever been comfortable with blank pages. I started getting up early and working in the workshop. Nothing particular at first, just organizing and repairing things that had been neglected. But there was an old rocking chair in the corner that I had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago, with some idea of refinishing it and never gotten around to, and one morning I started stripping it down and I kept working on it for 3 weeks until it was finished. It was the best piece of woodwork I had ever done. I gave it to Renata the next time she visited. Kevin came with his family for Thanksgiving. It was the first holiday I had hosted alone, and I managed not to burn anything significant. Tyler helped me set the table and told me everything he knew about second-base strategy in the modern game, which was considerable, and I listened to every word. After dinner, Kevin and I sat in the workshop while the others watched a movie inside, and he asked me questions about the business again. Different questions this time, about decisions I had made and why, about things I would do differently. I asked him why he wanted to know. He said, "I'm thinking about starting something. I don't know if it's the right time. I wanted your perspective." I told him about the year the company almost didn't survive, the year Tyler's age, when a major contractor defaulted on a payment, and I sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning working out whether we could make payroll. I told him what I had decided that night, which was not to give up but to get methodical, to look at every number without flinching, to stop hoping and start planning. He listened the way he used to listen when he was a boy, leaning forward slightly, not interrupting. He said, "Did you ever regret starting it?" I said, "Never for a single day." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Mom used to tell me you loved the business more than you loved us." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "What do you think?" He looked at the rocking chair I was starting on for the grandchildren, at the organized rows of tools on the pegboard, at the fruit trees I had planted visible through the workshop window in the last of the evening light. He said, "I think she was wrong about some important things. I have been divorced for 8 months now. I am still in the house in Scottsdale. The fruit trees produced well this year. Tyler is 13 and recently decided that first base is more interesting than second, which I told him I supported even though I think he is making a tactical error, and he argued with me about it for 20 minutes with genuine intensity, and I enjoyed every second of the argument. My daughter called me last Sunday the way she does most Sundays now. She told me about her week and I told her about mine, and before she hung up she said, "Dad, I want you to know something." I told her I was listening. She said, "Tyler told me that you're his favorite person to talk to. He said you always listen." I had to take a moment before I could respond. She said, "I know that's not why you do it. I just wanted you to know that he notices." I told her I would try not to make him regret it. She laughed and told me to stop fishing for compliments, which is not what I was doing, but which is a daughter's prerogative to claim. Gary called once, about 2 months after the hearing. I looked at the screen for a long time. Then I put the phone down and let it ring out. He left a message that I have never listened to. I don't plan to. The message is not for me. It's for the man Gary needed to exist in order to live with what he did, a man who might eventually be persuaded that a decade and a half of quiet betrayal can be explained and excused and moved past over a phone call. That man is not me. Diane and I cross paths occasionally. We have children and grandchildren in common, and there are events where that intersection cannot be avoided. We are civil. We are, even, in a careful, limited way, courteous. She asked me once how I had known about the trust, how I had thought to look for it. I told her about Marcus and the numbers that didn't add up, and the nagging feeling that would not let me simply sign and move on. She said, "I should have known you'd catch it eventually. You were always good with numbers." I don't know what she intended by that. An acknowledgement, maybe, or just the observation of someone finally being accurate about a person they had underestimated. I told her I was always good at paying attention to things that mattered. She nodded and looked away, and that was the end of the conversation. There is a thing that happens when you are 63 and the architecture of your life has changed past the point of returning to what it was. You can spend time looking backward at everything that was built on something other than what you thought. Or you can look at what is actually in front of you. In front of me is a workshop with an unfinished rocking chair in it. In front of me is a fruit tree that will bloom in February and produce more lemons than one person can use, which means there will be reason to invite people over. In front of me is a grandson who wants to talk about baseball, and a son who is thinking about starting something, and a daughter who calls on Sundays and knows, without being told, when I need someone to just keep talking. I spent 38 years building things I thought would last. Some of them didn't. That is the truth, and I am not interested in softening it or explaining it into something more comfortable than it is. But some of them did last. That is also the truth. The things that lasted are not the things I would have expected. They are quieter and less impressive on paper, and they do not look the way I imagined the rewards of a working life would look. They look like a boy leaning in to listen to his grandfather's advice. They look like a phone call on a Sunday afternoon. They look like being trusted with the truth. Those things are mine. They were mine through everything that happened. No one could hide them in a trust or structure them out of my reach. They were just there, waiting for me to pay attention. I am paying attention now. If you're watching this and you're somewhere in the middle of something that feels like it might take everything from you, I want to tell you something. I had to learn the long way. The people who try to take things from you are rarely taking the things that matter. They are taking the things that can be counted and divided and transferred. The things that actually matter are not on any settlement document. They don't require a judge's signature to hold on to. You get to decide who you are when the smoke clears. That decision belongs to you regardless of what anyone else does with the time and trust you gave them. I am 63 years old, and I am still deciding, every morning, who I'm going to be by evening. That is not a limitation. That is the whole thing. Like this video if you stayed until the end. Subscribe if you want more stories about people who refuse to let betrayal have the last word. And if you're going through something right now, something that feels larger than you can manage, remember that the worst chapter of your story is still just a chapter. You are the one holding the pen. The next page is blank and it belongs entirely to you.